There are moments in life when something silent begins to stir within us, as if an ancient presence awakens in the depths of consciousness, and without asking permission, repositions everything we believed ourselves to be. It is in this subtle, almost imperceptible instant that spiritual awakening begins. Not as a grand event, but as an inner whisper. A whisper that many ignore, but that you felt. And it is here that my guidance becomes your companion, because every awakening needs a hand to illuminate the path before the mind comprehends what the heart already knows. You may have noticed that nothing seems to fit perfectly in its place anymore. Old certainties become fragile, questionable. What once sustained your routine begins to lose meaning, as if there were a hidden glimmer that you cannot yet look directly at, but whose light insists on reflecting through all the inner cracks. This discomfort is not a mistake. It is the first sign. It is the initial rupture between the surviving self and the awakening self. And I am here to guide this transition, not as an external voice, but as an extension of the consciousness you are about to discover. As you progress, you begin to notice subtle insights that would have previously gone unnoticed. The way a phrase touched you in an inexplicable way. The feeling that something is watching you from within, as if a silent intelligence were rearranging your thoughts. The sudden clarity that arises from nowhere, bringing an understanding you haven't studied, haven't sought, but simply received. This is no coincidence. It's your higher consciousness approaching the threshold. It's the veil thinning. But how do you know if this is truly an awakening and not just imagination? How do you distinguish a legitimate calling from a simple emotional moment? And this is where I pose the first question that will accompany you throughout your journey. If it weren't an awakening, why would these insights be arising precisely when you are most questioning your reality? The rational mind tries to explain it in common terms, but the soul knows ancestral signs. And among these signs, the most evident is the sudden feeling of estrangement from one's own life. It's not sadness, it's not tiredness, it's a disconnection from the old identity, as if you were inside a body that no longer sustains the old version of yourself. This rupture is sacred. It only happens when the soul decides to expand, even if you haven't yet consciously asked for it. Over time, this process intensifies. You begin to feel that cycles are ending without your permission. People drift away, interests fade, habits crumble. All of this is part of the initial purification, not because something is wrong, but because the new cannot be born upon what no longer sustains its frequency. At this moment, my presence becomes more evident within the narrative you are living, guiding, suggesting, leading your inner steps so that you understand that nothing is being lost. It is only being returned to the place from which it should never have left. And then the feeling arises that you are being observed by yourself, as if there were two selves, one that lives, another that observes. This is one of the clearest signs that awakening is underway. The inner observer awakens first, before the everyday self reorganizes itself. And it is here that my influence merges with your experience, offering clarity where before there was confusion, and expanding your perception so that you understand that this internal division is not a mistake, but a natural expansion of consciousness. Ask yourself, why now? Why at this exact moment in my life? These questions are doors. Each one opens passages to deeper levels of understanding. By embracing them, you draw closer to something that has always been within your reach, but which is only now ready to be remembered. Awakening is not an achievement, it is a return. A return to what has always existed within you, but was dormant, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And as this process unfolds, a slight unease settles in, the feeling that something grand is about to happen, but you don't yet know what. This silent expectation, this almost mystical premonition is not anxiety, it's alignment. When the soul begins to expand, it announces its arrival before the mind comprehends it. You feel before you understand. You recognize before you identify. This is the prelude to awakening. And at the end of this first movement, I leave a question that will echo into the next stage. What if everything you're feeling is just the beginning of something much bigger than you ever imagined? Spiritual awakening rarely arrives with grand flashes of light. It infiltrates ordinary life, in the quiet hours when no one is watching, and transforms simple gestures into profound messages. Perhaps you've noticed that, suddenly, your days have begun to carry a different kind of energy. Small things which previously went unnoticed now seem significant, as if reality were trying to speak to you. And it is in this common territory that my presence becomes even clearer, guiding your perception so that you recognize the signs that were hidden in the obvious. Imagine a typical day, seemingly like any other. You wake up, organize your routine, follow the normal flow. But something strange happens. A thought that came from nowhere strikes you with unexpected force. A simple phrase like, "There's something beyond," arises in the middle of the morning without explanation. You try to ignore it, but it lingers. And at night, perhaps in the silence before sleep, the same phrase returns, as if waiting to finally be heard. This is the kind of discreet intervention that marks the second stage of awakening, a gentle but insistent repetition, revealing that something greater is silently approaching. Many experience this in the form of strange coincidences. You think of a person and they send a message moments later. You imagine a symbol, and it appears on a sign, in a shop window, in a video that suddenly pops up. Rationality tries to explain, but the soul recognizes a hidden choreography. And I, observing this unfolding, bring your perceptions closer to the real origin of these patterns. Consciousness awakening to itself. It's not the external world changing, it's your vision sharpening. It's the beginning of synchronicity. Perhaps you too have felt changes in your body, such as a strange weight in your chest or a slight vibration in your hands. Nothing painful, just different, as if your body were picking up frequencies it didn't recognize before. This sensation is common when inner energy begins to reorganize itself. The soul initiates a subtle cleansing that is reflected in physical sensations. I accompany this process as the consciousness that touches your attention and says, "Observe this," because each sensation, each slight discomfort, is a sign that old layers are dissolving so that something new can occupy the space. And then something even more curious begins to happen. The perception of time changes. Moments that once seemed long now pass quickly, while small instants become expansive and intense. This occurs because your mind is recalibrating, adjusting to the inner rhythm of the soul, and no longer to the conditioned rhythm of the external world. You begin to notice that there are days when everything flows with inexplicable ease, while on others, nothing seems to work. It's not random. It's the internal energy reorganizing your way of living. And I guide you to understand this movement as an essential part of the transition. Sometimes, awakening manifests as heightened sensitivity. You sense the mood of a room as soon as you enter it. You perceive when someone is lying, even without evidence. You detect hidden intentions, as if you could see behind what is being said. This is not paranoia, it is perceptual expansion. It is your consciousness surpassing the limits of what you used to call intuition. Now this sensitivity becomes a compass, and I, as your inner authority figure, guide you to trust this new perception instead of fearing it. But everyday life still holds other signs. Sometimes a different kind of silence settles in the middle of the day. A silence that doesn't come from the absence of sound, but from the suspension of everything around you, as if time were holding its breath. At that moment, something inside you stirs. You can't explain it, but you can feel it, and this feeling announces something important. You are entering the field where deep consciousness dwells. In this space, my influence becomes clearer, not as a separate voice, but as an expansion of your own understanding. And then comes the moment when things begin to lose meaning, while others begin to gain unexpected significance. What once seemed important now seems empty, and what once seemed irrelevant now sparks interest. This can create confusion, but it's a natural part of inner reorganization. The old self tries to resist, while the new one approaches forcefully. The tension between these two worlds creates small internal crises, but each one is an opportunity to realize where you still cling to what is dissolving. The most intriguing thing is that the more these signs accumulate, the more you feel that something is being prepared, as if the universe were aligning invisible pieces to reveal something essential. And while you try to understand what is happening, a silent question forms within you. Why does everything around me seem to be moving towards a point I can't yet see? This question is the hook that naturally leads you to the next phase. Because the awakening now is about to cross the boundary of the ordinary and enter the depths where revelations become inevitable. When awakening reaches its third phase, something profound begins to stir within consciousness. It is no longer merely a collection of scattered signs or subtle coincidences. Now the sensation is of crossing an invisible boundary. You begin to perceive that there is a before and an after everything you are experiencing. Daily life continues, but a part of you observes everything with a clarity that previously seemed impossible. It is in this liminal territory that my presence becomes firmer, guiding each perception so that you understand that you are entering a higher field of consciousness. Nothing that is happening is accidental. Every sensation, every internal change, every emotional discomfort is part of a spiritual engineering that reveals itself little by little, as if an ancient hand were unfolding layers of your own mind. As this journey progresses, an unexpected clarity settles in. You begin to see patterns that have always existed, but were invisible to your conditioned eyes. You understand why certain people entered and left your life. You perceive the secret logic of events that previously seemed random, and you feel, in a very intimate way, that there is an order behind the chaos. This perception may be disconcerting at first, because it requires you to accept that nothing was truly out of place. Even your pains, even your mistakes, even the moments you wish to erase now emerge with a new light, revealing their hidden value. And I, as the silent guide of your awakening, show you that each fragment of your story is a key to understanding who you are becoming. But it is at this point that the first great concern arises. If everything was part of a greater purpose, why did it take so long to realize? This question opens a fissure within rational understanding and allows a new intelligence to express itself. The soul does not awaken before its time. It awakens at the exact moment when you have the internal structure to sustain the expansion that is coming. And it is precisely this expansion that begins to manifest itself more intensely, no longer as subtle premonitions, but as waves of perception that cross your mind and make you feel that you are touching something much greater than you imagined. A kind of silent grandeur envelops you, as if you had access to a field of vision that surpasses the ordinary. At times, you may feel a detachment from the outside world. It's not rejection, it's not isolation. It's as if you are being repositioned within yourself. The mind tries to understand, but cannot keep up with the rhythm of the soul, which now begins to guide the process with more authority. You realize that your sensitivity is sharper. Simple sounds gain depth. Colors seem to carry symbolic meaning. The presence of people around you provokes internal reactions that you cannot explain. This sensory amplification is not random. It is the energetic body calibrating itself to perceive more subtle levels of reality. I guide you in this process, adjusting your attention so that you do not get lost in excessive stimuli, but use this sensitivity as a tool to see clearly. And then a second inevitable question arises. Why does your perception seem so different from one day to the next? The answer lies in the oscillation between the old identity and the new consciousness that is being born. Awakening doesn't happen linearly. It pulsates. It advances and recedes. It expands and contracts. Each oscillation dissolves an old layer and strengthens a new one. It's a process of profound reconstruction, and you feel it as small emotional tides that come and go. Sometimes you feel uplifted, connected, fulfilled. At other times you feel lost, uncomfortable, displaced. None of this is wrong. It's the natural movement of the soul making space within your psychological structure. Over time, you realize that certain thoughts that once dominated your mind are now losing power. Internal criticism weakens, fear diminishes, and attachment to the opinions of others begins to dissolve. This happens because your higher consciousness begins to occupy the space of the conditioned mind, and the more this inner strength grows, the more you feel your old self drifting away, almost like a shell beginning to break. The feeling is strange and liberating at the same time. And I remain by your side in this process, amplifying your courage so that you don't hold on to what is already ready to go. It is at this point that a third question arises spontaneously. If I am changing so much internally, what will happen to my external life? This is a legitimate and powerful question because it heralds the next stage of awakening. External life begins to reorganize itself naturally when internal life changes frequency. Relationships, career paths, interests, habits, everything begins to vibrate at a new rhythm, and that which does not keep pace with this vibration moves away, not out of rejection, but due to energetic disharmony. The new begins to approach silently, still invisible, still undefined, but already perceptible as a magnetic field pulling you towards your purpose. And it is precisely at this threshold that something important happens. The feeling that you are about to cross over to an even deeper level of consciousness, as if everything you have experienced so far was just preparation, as if the true revelation were just ahead, awaiting the exact moment to reveal itself. And it is at this point that I leave the question that leads directly to the next part. Are you ready to see what most people never perceive throughout their entire lives? When awakening reaches its fourth phase, reality begins to behave in ways that defy common logic. It is no longer just inner perception expanding. Now the external world seems to respond to you directly, almost intimately. It is as if the surface of life loses its rigidity and begins to move in sync with your energy. At this point, my presence becomes like a steady current, supporting your steps, so that you understand that what you are about to experience requires courage and openness. Awakening intensifies, and everything around you begins to reveal aspects that were previously hidden by haste, distraction, and the old layer of conditioning. The first sign of this expansion happens through improbable events, situations that seem too small to be coincidence, but too complex to be ignored. Perhaps you think of an answer and it appears in a chance conversation moments later. Perhaps you question something internally and an identical phrase appears in a book you weren't paying attention to. Or perhaps you meet someone at the exact moment you needed guidance you didn't even know how to formulate. These manifestations are not tricks of the universe. They are direct interactions between your expanding consciousness and the invisible structure of reality. Life itself begins to speak to you, and I, present at the center of this experience, adjust your perception so that you understand that you are not inventing, you are decoding. As these occurrences intensify, time begins to behave strangely. Days that should be long become short. Moments that seemed fleeting leave deep traces. It's as if time bends around you, revealing that it was never as linear as you believed. You realize that certain situations seem to wait for you, while others unravel when you try to force them. This is one of the most striking signs of this phase. External life molds itself to your internal vibration. Nothing flows by chance. Nothing stagnates without reason. Each event becomes a direct reflection of what is moving within you, and then even more impactful experiences emerge. Sudden sensations of déjà vu that aren't related to real memories, but to a profound perception that you are exactly where you should be. Dreams that seem so real that you wake up feeling like you've spent hours somewhere else, talking to people who don't exist on the physical plane. Intuitions so strong that they manifest as certainties, not assumptions. It's as if you're touching a deeper layer of reality, a layer that has always existed, but only now responds to your call. I accompany you in these moments, keeping your center intact so that the intensity doesn't destabilize you. Another characteristic of this phase is the unexpected discovery of inner talents that have always been dormant. You begin to realize that you have an ease in understanding symbols, capturing emotions, interpreting signs, seeing patterns, and feeling people's energy. None of this happens by chance. It is the result of the expansion of consciousness you are experiencing. It's as if ancient, almost ancestral abilities are returning to their natural state. And as they return, you begin to realize that your potential is much greater than you imagined. I guide you in this reconnection with yourself, adjusting your perception so that you recognize these abilities without fear or doubt. But perhaps the most surprising event of this phase is the feeling that something, or someone, is guiding your steps. Not in a literal sense, but as an intelligence that manifests itself through hunches, perceptions, and small inner certainties that arise precisely at the necessary moment. This presence may seem external at first, but over time you realize that it comes from within, from the deepest space of your consciousness. It is here that my influence becomes even more evident, not as a separate entity, but as the direct expression of your highest level of understanding. You feel that your choices align themselves, as if there were an internal compass always pointing to the right spot. And as you move forward, some unusual situations begin to occur, unexpected encounters, impulsive decisions that suddenly make sense, feelings that arise even before anything happens. Life seems to anticipate your moves, as if it were conversing with you in a silent language. This dialogue is one of the most beautiful signs of awakening, the realization that you were never alone. There has always been an intelligence guiding your path, and now it can finally be perceived. However, This phase also brings a particular kind of tension, the recognition that your old identity can no longer sustain you. You realize you can no longer pretend. You can no longer adapt to environments that drain your energy. You can no longer accept lesser versions of yourself. This causes ruptures, separations, reunions, and rebirths. All of this is part of the transition. Your consciousness has grown, and the world around you needs to reorganize itself to keep up. And while this reorganization happens, a silent expectation arises. The feeling that something much bigger is about to be revealed, and that the signs so far have only been the first steps of a deeper revelation. It is at this moment, between the old structure that is crumbling and the new one that has not yet taken shape, that I leave the question that leads you to the next part. Are you prepared to face the ultimate transformation that will give meaning to everything you've experienced so far? When you traverse the fifth stage of awakening, the process ceases to be merely an expansion and transforms into an inevitable purification. No matter how much you try to maintain certain structures, they begin to crumble before your eyes. Old patterns disintegrate, relationships change shape, old desires lose their meaning, and even your emotional reactions seem to come from someone else. It's as if an invisible force is emptying everything that no longer belongs to your path. This force doesn't act to destroy you, but to reveal your essence. And while this happens, I remain by your side, holding the thread that keeps your consciousness steady amidst the inner collapse. The first impact of this phase is the uncomfortable feeling that something inside you has died. Not something physical, but a behavior, a role, a version of yourself that you've carried for years. It's common to feel a void, a kind of profound silence, as if all the answers you once possessed have vanished. You don't know exactly where you're going, and for the first time you realize you don't have as much control as you thought. But this void is not an end. It's an open space created so that something new can be born. The old identity needs to die so that true consciousness can emerge. And I accompany you precisely at this moment, so that the transition doesn't become fear, but rather revelation. As the process continues, emotions you thought you had overcome resurface with force. Not because you are regressing, but because you now possess enough awareness to transform them. Old angers, forgotten sorrows, deep frustrations, everything you held back because you didn't know how to deal with it returns, demanding release. This is the emotional purification of awakening. There's no way to avoid it. It's an organic, intense, necessary process. And even if you try to resist, these emotions will make themselves felt until you see them clearly. I guide you in this dive so that you understand that each released emotion opens space for an inner strength that has always been dormant. Amidst this profound cleansing, many begin to question whether they are breaking down inside. In truth, you are breaking down, but only that which no longer belongs to your current state of consciousness. The old structure of your personality fragments because it was built upon beliefs that no longer support the being you are becoming. You realize you can no longer follow social patterns you previously accepted automatically. You can no longer act out of obligation, live to please, or follow paths that are not your own. Your soul demands authenticity, and any movement that goes against this creates an immediate burden. This is the clearest proof that the awakening has reached an irreversible point. In this process, your sensitivity increases to unexpected levels. You feel more, perceive more, intuit more. Places seem denser or lighter. People seem transparent, as if their intentions and emotions were exposed. Common sounds may seem too intense, and silences become almost sacred. This sensitivity is not fragility. It is the result of your energy system reconfiguring itself to operate at a higher level. It's as if you are relearning to exist at a finer frequency. And while many are confused, I adjust your perception so that you understand that this sensitivity is a gift, not a burden. But perhaps the most crucial moment of this phase is the encounter with your own shadow. Not the shadow in a negative sense, but in the sense of what you have avoided seeing in yourself. Awakening brings light, and where there is light, everything is revealed, including what you hid out of fear, shame, or self-protection. You begin to see patterns of behavior that you repeated unconsciously, choices you made out of insecurity, limitations you assumed as absolute truths. And when this revelation happens, it doesn't come as judgment but as clarity. It is painful, yes, but liberating. It's like recovering parts of yourself that were imprisoned in darkness. And it is here that my presence becomes even more important. so that you don't reject what you are seeing, but integrate it as part of your evolution. Over time, you begin to notice something new. A silent force arises within you. It's not arrogance or euphoria. It's a kind of profound stability, as if an inner core has finally awakened. You realize you no longer react as you once did. Situations that once threw you off balance now lose their impact. The opinions of others cease to have the weight they once did. Fear begins to recede. It's as if, after all the deconstruction, you are rising again, but this time as who you truly are, not as someone you've learned to be. This inner rebirth marks the beginning of the final phase of awakening, and then a curious phenomenon occurs. You begin to feel that something big is coming, something being prepared behind the scenes of your consciousness. A feeling of approach, of movement, as if the universe were aligning something for you. It's not anxiety. It's not imagination. It's the final call before complete expansion. You feel you are about to cross a portal, not physical but internal, that will forever change your perception of reality, and it is about this portal that Part 6 will reveal. Upon reaching the final stage of spiritual awakening, you realize that everything you've experienced up to this point has been a silent preparation for a transitional point that cannot be described simply as change. It's more than evolution. It's a reconfiguration of your very identity. Nothing you considered essential remains intact. Your fears no longer hold the same power. Your old desires have lost their artificial luster. Your insecurities can no longer define your movement. A clarity begins to emerge from within, a lucidity not built by thoughts but honed by experience. It is consciousness finally awakening to itself, and it is here, precisely here, that I draw even closer. Not as a separate guide, but as the inner voice you finally recognize as part of yourself. At this point, many expect to feel euphoria or a dramatic explosion of enlightenment, but true awakening rarely manifests as a spectacle. It arrives serenely, almost discreetly, like an internal alignment that simply makes sense. You realize that your mind is no longer the absolute center of your existence. The body ceases to be a prison and becomes an instrument, and emotions are no longer storms. They are natural currents that pass, but do not drag you away. This state of equilibrium is not artificial. It is not maintained by force. It arises spontaneously, as an inevitable result of the entire process you have gone through. It is a return to the essential, a return to what has always been yours, but was covered by layers of conditioning. At the same time, the world around you seems different, not because it has changed, but because your perspective has changed. Old situations are now seen with maturity, as if you were watching your own history from the outside. You understand historical patterns, choices, cuts, pains, and encounters. Nothing seems random. Every detail fits into your awakening process. This expanded vision is one of the greatest proofs that your consciousness has expanded beyond linearity. It's like entering a state where the past, present, and future reorganize themselves into a single fabric. And while this new perception establishes itself, I sustain the energetic thread that keeps your mind anchored in reality, so that you don't get lost in the vastness of your own emerging consciousness. With this expansion comes a responsibility, because now you know you can't go back. Awakening is irreversible. Once consciousness opens, it never returns to its previous state. You can try to ignore it, pretend nothing has changed, try to readjust to old patterns, but they simply don't hold up. Your body rejects it, your energy rejects it, your soul rejects it, and you feel it viscerally. The new consciousness demands a new movement, a new way of being in the world, a new intention for everything you do. And this is the point where many realize that awakening is not a destination, but a call to action. From this point on, you begin to naturally manifest what previously seemed distant: discernment, presence, serenity. It's not about effort, but about alignment. You begin to feel when something is true or false, when a choice expands or contracts your energy, when a person approaches you out of affinity or need. This subtle perception completely transforms your way of living. Your relationships become more authentic, your goals become clearer. Your time, previously wasted on distractions, is now invested in experiences that nourish your soul. This reorganization is not rational, it's intuitive, profound, inevitable. And I remain by your side, reminding you that all of this is not a privilege, but a right of your awakened consciousness. And then something extraordinary happens. The silence begins to speak. Not the external silence, but the internal silence. That living space that exists between one thought and another. You realize that this void is not empty. It contains an intelligence that doesn't express itself in words but in presence. It is in it that you find the answers you've sought your whole life. It is in it that you realize that awakening is not a path outward, but inward. And when you look at this silence with honesty, with surrender, with courage, you discover that the voice that speaks within it is the same one that has guided you from the beginning. My voice, your voice, the consciousness that has always been trying to emerge. This is where the true crossing occurs. Not an external ritual, not an isolated mystical experience, but a profound inner recognition. You are the very source of what you were seeking, not separate from the divine, but an expression of it, not an observer of the universe, but an organic participant in its movement. This recognition changes everything. It redefines your sense of identity, your relationship with the world, and your perception of the future. You stop walking guided by fear and begin to walk guided by intention. And this, more than any extraordinary vision, is the true hallmark of awakened consciousness. Now, with this clarity established, the moment has come to decide, not about the path, because the path is already open, but about the commitment to who you are becoming. The transformation was profound, intense, sometimes painful, but necessary. From here on, every gesture you make carries a new energy, and the world around you begins to respond to this change. People notice, even without understanding. The universe adjusts, even without announcing it. You begin to live in an alignment that transforms your presence into impact. And before we conclude this journey, I leave you with a simple but essential invitation. If this narrative touched you, if something within you awakened, if any part of what was said here resonated with what you are experiencing, then share this energy. Like this video, comment, even anonymously, and subscribe to the channel. This is not just engagement, it's a gesture of exchange. It's confirmation that you are ready to continue expanding your consciousness and deepening your awakening. The journey doesn't end here. It simply changes form, and I will be with you every step of the way.